Nobody in that ballroom expected a billionaire to cross the entire room just to hug the man everyone had been laughing at for the last 20 minutes. But that is exactly what happened. And by the time it was over, not a single person at that reunion would ever look at Daniel Carter the same way again. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever walked into a room and felt smaller than everyone else, stay with this story until the end, because it is about to remind you why quiet, ordinary people are sometimes the strongest people in the room. And if stories like this move you, hit that like button and subscribe now, because we have so many more coming that will remind you exactly what really matters in this life. Daniel Carter never wanted to go to the reunion. He had told himself that for 3 straight weeks, ever since the cream-colored envelope with the gold-embossed lettering showed up in his mailbox. Riverside High School, class of 2006, 20-year reunion. He had almost thrown it away twice. The only reason it was still sitting on his kitchen counter, propped against the napkin holder, was his daughter, Lily. She was 8 years old, all gap-toothed smiles and stubborn opinions, and she had found the invitation while looking for a pen to finish her homework. "Dad, you have to go," she had said, tracing her finger along the gold letters like they were something magical. "It says right here, we hope to see you and celebrate everything you've become." She looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that were so much like her mother's, and something in Daniel's chest had tightened in a way he did not have words for. He was 38 years old. He owned a small auto repair garage on the edge of town, the kind of place with a hand-painted sign and a bell above the door that still worked because he refused to replace it. He fixed transmissions and brake lines and the occasional stubborn old truck that nobody else wanted to touch. He was, by every measure his old classmates would use, unremarkable. No big house, no fancy car, ironically, despite spending his life around cars. No wife anymore. Not since Rachel had passed 3 years ago after a battle with cancer that had taken almost everything Daniel had, financially and emotionally, and left him alone to raise their daughter. He worked 12-hour days sometimes, came home with grease under his fingernails that never quite washed all the way out, and fell asleep most nights on the couch because he was too tired to climb the stairs. He packed Lily's lunch every morning, braided her hair badly but with love, and showed up to every single school function even when his body was screaming for rest. He was, in his own quiet way, doing the hardest job in the world. But he did not think of it that way. He just thought of it as being her dad. The idea of standing in a hotel ballroom in front of people who had once been the golden children of Riverside High, people who were now doctors and lawyers and executives, people who would ask him what he did for a living and watch their faces change when he told them, made his stomach twist into knots. He remembered high school well enough. He had not been popular. He had not been cruel or bullied exactly, just invisible. The kind of kid who sat near the back, who ate lunch with 2 or 3 friends and never tried out for anything, never ran for anything, never stood out. Except once. Except for Marcus. Marcus Webb had been the new kid junior year, transferring in halfway through the semester after his family lost their home in a fire that started from faulty wiring in their old apartment building. Marcus showed up to Riverside High wearing clothes that were slightly too big, borrowed from a cousin, carrying nothing but a backpack and the kind of exhaustion in his eyes that most 16-year-olds should never have to carry. The other kids had noticed immediately. Kids always notice. They noticed the shoes that were falling apart at the seams, the way he flinched when someone raised a voice too loud, the way he sat alone at lunch on his first day, staring at a tray of food he clearly could not really afford, turning a single apple over and over in his hands like he was deciding whether he had the right to eat it. Daniel remembered walking past that table with his own lunch tray, remembered the group of kids 2 tables over already starting to snicker, already starting to whisper about the new kid's shoes. And Daniel, who never stood out, who never drew attention to himself, had done something that day he still could not fully explain even 22 years later. He had walked straight over and sat down across from Marcus Webb, like they had been friends their whole lives. "You're new," Daniel had said, not as a question. Marcus had looked up, wary, like he was waiting for the punchline of some cruel joke. "Yeah. I'm Daniel. That seat's usually empty anyway, so you're not stealing it from anybody." He had nodded toward the half-eaten sandwich on his own tray. "You want half of this? My mom always packs too much." That was not true. Daniel's mother packed exactly enough, not a bite more, because money was tight in the Carter household too, tighter than most people knew. But he split the sandwich anyway, right down the middle, and pushed half of it across the table before Marcus could argue. And from that day on, they were inseparable. Over the following 2 years, Daniel and Marcus became the kind of friends that only exist a few times in a person's life. Daniel taught Marcus how to change a tire in his father's garage, the same garage Daniel would eventually inherit and turn into his own shop. Marcus taught Daniel how to code, hunched over an old second-hand computer, teaching himself from library books because his family could not afford tutoring or classes. Daniel gave Marcus rides to school every single morning without being asked, without ever making Marcus feel like he owed anything for it. When Marcus's family could not afford the $15 fee for the science fair that year, Daniel had quietly paid it out of his own savings from mowing lawns all summer, and never told a soul, not even Marcus, not for years. Senior year, when college applications came around, Marcus had confided in Daniel one night that he did not think he could go. There was no money, not for tuition, not for the application fees, not for any of it. His family was barely staying afloat as it was. Daniel had listened, and then he had done something that changed the entire trajectory of Marcus Webb's life. He drove Marcus to the community college 40 minutes away, sat with him in the financial aid office for 3 hours, and helped him fill out every single form for a scholarship program neither of them had known existed, until Daniel had spent an entire weekend researching it in the school library. Marcus got the scholarship. It covered his first 2 years completely. From there, Marcus transferred to a state university on an academic scholarship of his own making, majoring in computer science, and by senior year of college he had already built a small piece of software that a venture capital firm wanted to buy for more money than either of their families had ever seen in one place. They had lost touch after that, the way people sometimes do, not out of any falling out, but simply because life pulled them in different directions. Daniel had stayed in Riverside to help his aging father with the garage. Marcus had moved to the West Coast, chasing an idea that grew bigger and bigger every year. Daniel would occasionally see his old friend's name in a magazine headline, or hear it mentioned on the news, always with a slight disbelief, a quiet pride he never spoke aloud. Marcus Webb, founder and chief executive of a technology company that now touched the lives of hundreds of millions of people across the globe. Marcus Webb, listed among the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Marcus Webb, the kid who once turned an apple over and over in his hands because he was not sure he deserved to eat it. Daniel never reached out. It was not pride exactly, or maybe it was, in the quietest possible way. He did not want Marcus to think he was chasing him for money or favors. He was proud of his old friend from a distance, the way you are proud of family you rarely see, and he let that be enough. The morning of the reunion arrived whether Daniel was ready for it or not. Lily helped him pick out his shirt, a plain navy blue button-down that was the nicest thing he owned, and she straightened his collar with the seriousness of a much older person. "You look handsome, Dad," she told him. And Daniel had to blink hard for a second before he trusted his voice enough to thank her. His sister Karen agreed to watch Lily for the evening, and as Daniel drove to the Grand Meridian Hotel downtown, his hands tightened on the steering wheel more than once. He almost turned around at a red light 2 blocks from the venue. He did not, mostly because he had already told Lily he would go, and he was not about to break a promise to his daughter, not even a small one, not even for his own comfort. The ballroom was exactly as grand as he remembered these things always were, chandeliers throwing warm light across round tables draped in white linen. A banner stretched across the far wall reading Riverside High School Class of 2006. A jazz quartet played somewhere near the bar. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and clustered near the center of the room, holding court the way they always had. Were the same faces Daniel remembered from 20 years ago. Older now, more polished, dressed in the unmistakable armor of financial success. Brett Sullivan, who had been captain of the football team, was now apparently running his family's real estate empire, judging by the way he was loudly discussing a recent acquisition to anyone within earshot. Jessica Farrow, once the head cheerleader, was a well-known local attorney, and she had arrived in a dress that probably cost more than Daniel made in a month. There were doctors in the room, a state senator's aide, two people who had started their own companies, one woman who had appeared on a regional morning news program often enough that people recognized her on sight. Daniel found himself standing near the edge of the room for the better part of an hour, nursing a single glass of water, exchanging a few polite, forgettable greetings with people who barely remembered his name. He was fine with the edges. He had always been more comfortable there. But it was Brett Sullivan who eventually spotted him, and with the kind of loud, performative friendliness that Daniel remembered all too well from high school hallways, waved him over to the circle near the center of the room. "Daniel Carter. No way, man, is that really you? Come here, come here." Brett clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to sting, and Daniel found himself pulled into the circle of old classmates whether he wanted to be or not. "Guys, you remember Daniel, right? Quiet guy, always fixing something. So, what have you been up to, man? You still in Riverside?" "Yeah," Daniel said, "still here. I run the garage on 5th Street, my dad's old shop." There was a small pause, the kind of pause that Daniel had felt before, more times than he could count. The pause where people recalibrated their opinion of him in real time. Jessica smiled, but it did not quite reach her eyes. "Oh, that's nice. That's really honest work." "Honest work," Brett repeated, and there was something in the way he said it, something faintly condescending, that made a couple of the others near him chuckle softly into their champagne glasses. "Good for you, man. Some people just aren't built for the rat race, right? Nothing wrong with that." Daniel felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression steady. The same steady expression he had learned to wear during the hardest days of Rachel's illness, during nights when the bills piled up faster than the paychecks, during every moment life had tried to knock him down. "It works for me," he said simply. "I like fixing things, and it lets me be home for my daughter." "Oh, you have a kid?" Jessica's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Is your wife here tonight?" "She passed away 3 years ago." The silence that followed was the uncomfortable kind, the kind where people did not quite know what to say, and rather than offer real sympathy, more than one person in that circle simply looked for the nearest excuse to change the subject or drift away entirely. Brett cleared his throat and gestured vaguely toward the bar. "Well, hey, it was great catching up, man. I should go say hi to the Hendersons. They just got back from Monaco, you believe that?" The circle dispersed within minutes, the way circles do when they have decided someone no longer belongs in them, and Daniel was left standing near the center of the dance floor, alone in a room full of people, feeling exactly the way he had felt at 17 years old. Invisible and slightly less than everyone around him. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself he had a daughter at home who thought the sun rose and set around him, that he had a business he had built with his own 2 hands, that he had survived things in the last 3 years. Most of these people could not imagine surviving. He told himself all of that, and mostly he believed it. But it still stung. The particular sting of being quietly dismissed by people who had never once bothered to actually know him. He was making his way toward the exit, deciding he had fulfilled his promise to Lily and could leave in good conscience, when the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened and the entire room seemed to shift. A hush moved through the crowd first, followed by a wave of excited whispers, followed by the unmistakable sound of dozens of people reaching for their phones at once. Daniel turned, along with everyone else, to see what had caused the commotion, and his breath caught in his throat. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway. He looked different than Daniel remembered, of course, 20 years older, dressed in a simple charcoal suit that somehow radiated more quiet authority than anything Brett Sullivan or anyone else in that room was wearing. His hair had a touch of gray at the temples now, but his eyes, when they swept across the room, were exactly the same eyes Daniel remembered from that lunch table 22 years ago, sharp and watchful, and in that moment, searching. The reaction in the ballroom was immediate and almost comical in its transformation. Brett Sullivan practically sprinted toward the doorway, champagne glass in hand, already extending his other hand for a handshake, and already talking about some real estate opportunity Marcus simply had to hear about. Jessica Farrow smoothed her dress and moved forward with a bright, camera-ready smile. The state senator's aide was already angling for a photograph. People who had not said 2 words to each other all night suddenly found common purpose in getting close enough to be seen near Marcus Webb. Marcus shook a few hands politely as he moved through the crowd, offering brief, gracious nods, the practiced patience of a man who had learned long ago how to navigate rooms like this without giving away too much of himself. But his eyes kept moving, kept scanning past the eager faces pressing toward him, searching for something, or someone in particular. And then he found him. Daniel had frozen near the edge of the dance floor, still holding his half-empty glass of water, watching the scene unfold with the same disbelief as everyone else in the room. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Daniel saw something shift in his old friend's expression, something that softened and brightened all at once. Marcus Webb did not stop to finish his conversation with Brett Sullivan. He did not pause for the photograph the senator's aide was angling for. He simply excused himself, mid-sentence, and began walking, directly and purposefully, straight through the center of the crowd, past every single person who had spent the last 5 minutes trying to get his attention, until he was standing in front of Daniel Carter. The entire ballroom had gone quiet, watching. "Danny," Marcus said, and his voice cracked slightly on the old nickname nobody had used in over 2 decades. "I heard you might be here tonight. I almost didn't believe it." Before Daniel could respond, Marcus pulled him into a tight embrace, the kind of hug reserved for family, for the people who truly matter, and Daniel felt something in his chest finally loosen after an entire evening of holding himself together. "You look good, man," Marcus said, stepping back but keeping a hand on Daniel's shoulder, as if he needed the physical confirmation that his old friend was really standing there. "You look exactly the same." "You look like you own half the internet," Daniel said, and it startled a laugh out of both of them, breaking some of the tension that had settled over the room. Marcus turned then, addressing the crowd that had gathered around them, curious and confused in equal measure. His voice, when he spoke, carried easily across the silent ballroom. "I want everyone here to know something," he said. "Some of you have asked me tonight what I attribute my success to. You've asked about strategy, about timing, about luck. And I always give some polished answer at events like this, but the real answer is standing right here." He put his hand on Daniel's shoulder again. "This man is the reason I finished high school. This man is the reason I ever set foot in a college classroom. This man gave me half his lunch on the worst day of my life without asking a single question, and then spent 4 years making sure I never had to feel invisible again." He told them the story, briefly but completely, about the apartment fire, about the shoes that were falling apart, about the sandwich split down the middle at a lunch table 22 years ago. He told them about the weekend Daniel spent researching scholarships in a library, instead of enjoying his own senior year. He told them, with his voice growing thicker with emotion, that everything he had built, every job his company had created, every life his technology had touched, traced back to a 16-year-old boy who decided a new kid deserved a seat at his table. "I built a company that today employs over 4,000 people," Marcus said, looking directly at Daniel. I've been on magazine covers, I've spoken at the United Nations, and in 22 years, not one single day has gone by where I didn't think about what would have happened to me if Daniel Carter hadn't sat down across from me that day." He turned to the room, to Brett and Jessica, and everyone else who had dismissed Daniel just an hour earlier. "So when I hear that some of you spent tonight looking down on this man because he chooses to fix cars for a living instead of chasing a corner office, I want you to understand something. The measure of a person was never their job title. It was never their bank account. Daniel Carter has more integrity in one afternoon than most people manage in a lifetime, and I am standing here today, in this suit, in this life, because of him." The ballroom was utterly silent. Somewhere near the back, someone began to clap, hesitantly at first, and then the applause spread, uncertain and a little ashamed, through the entire room. Brett Sullivan, who moments earlier had been laughing about honest work, now stood near the edge of the crowd with his face flushed red, suddenly finding his shoes very interesting. Jessica Farrow's earlier bright smile had faltered into something more genuine, more humbled. Marcus was not finished. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into Daniel's hand along with both of his own hands wrapped around it. "I know you never asked me for anything, not once, not in 22 years, and that's exactly why I'm asking you for something now. Let me help you, not out of charity, out of debt, a debt I have wanted to repay for a very long time." Daniel tried to protest, the same way he had always deflected gratitude his entire life. But Marcus shook his head before he could get the words out. "I'm not talking about a handout, Danny. I'm talking about a partnership. I want to fund the expansion of your garage into a full training program. A real trade school for kids who need exactly what you gave me back then. A chance and someone willing to believe in them. I want to put your name on it. The Carter Foundation for Trade Education. I've already started the paperwork. I just needed to find you first." Daniel stood there, stunned into silence, feeling 22 years of quiet, unspoken sacrifice suddenly catch up with him all at once. In the middle of a ballroom full of people who, an hour earlier, had not thought him worth their time. He thought of Lily at home, of the years of 12-hour days at the garage, of Rachel's hospital bills, of every night he had told himself that doing the right thing simply had to be its own reward, because nothing else was coming. And for the first time in a very long while, he let himself cry, right there in front of everyone, not out of sadness, but out of something closer to relief. "Okay," he said finally, his voice thick. "Okay, let's do it." The rest of the evening unfolded very differently than it had begun. People who had barely acknowledged Daniel earlier now approached him with a newfound, if slightly sheepish, respect, asking genuine questions about his garage, about his daughter, about the years since high school. Daniel answered them all with the same quiet grace he had carried into the room, without a trace of bitterness, without rubbing anyone's earlier behavior in their face. That was never who he was, and becoming someone who kept score was not a lesson he intended to learn now. Marcus stayed by his side for most of the night, the two of them trading stories from 22 years ago, filling in the gaps of the decades they had missed, laughing in a way that made it clear the years apart had done nothing to dull the friendship they had built at that lunch table. At one point, Marcus asked to see a photograph of Lily, and Daniel pulled up a picture on his phone of his daughter grinning gap-toothed at the camera, holding up a science project she had built entirely on her own. Marcus studied the photo for a long moment. "She's got your eyes," he said softly. "Make sure she knows how proud you are of her. Every single day. That's worth more than anything I could ever put my name on." Daniel drove home that night with the windows down despite the cold, the business card sitting on the passenger seat beside him, his mind turning over everything that had just happened. He thought about how close he had come to not going at all, about how easily he could have let his own insecurity keep him from that ballroom entirely. He thought about how strange it was that the very thing he had done without any expectation of return, a simple act of kindness toward a scared, lonely kid, had circled back around after 22 years to change the entire trajectory of his own life. When he got home, Lily was already asleep, curled up on the couch waiting for him despite her aunt's best efforts to get her to bed. Daniel carried her gently up to her room, tucked the blankets around her shoulders, and sat there for a long moment in the quiet dark, watching her breathe, thinking about everything that lay ahead now, the training program, the foundation, the chance to give other kids exactly what he had given Marcus so many years ago without ever expecting a single thing in return. In the months that followed, the Carter Foundation for Trade Education broke ground on the lot next to Daniel's original garage, funded entirely by Marcus Webb and staffed initially by Daniel himself, who taught his very first class of 12 students how to properly diagnose an engine problem, using nothing but patience and their own two hands. Some of those students came from backgrounds not unlike Marcus's own, kids who had been overlooked, underestimated, written off by people who judged them too quickly. Daniel made sure every single one of them knew, from their very first day, that they belonged exactly where they were sitting. The story of that reunion night eventually made its way online, first through a single photograph someone had taken of Marcus embracing Daniel across the crowded ballroom, then through the fuller account Marcus himself shared during an interview about the foundation's launch. It spread the way these stories sometimes do, not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it reminded people of something simple and true, that kindness, given freely and without condition, has a way of finding its way back to you eventually. Sometimes 22 years later, sometimes in a ballroom full of people who never expected to see a quiet mechanic become the most important person in the room. Daniel never did become a billionaire. He never wanted to be one. He still wakes up most mornings and drives to the same garage on 5th Street. Still gets grease under his fingernails that never quite washes all the way out. Still packs Lily's lunch and braids her hair a little unevenly and shows up to every single school function, now with a little more room to breathe, a little more security than he had before, but with the same steady, quiet heart that made a scared new kid feel like he belonged 22 years ago. And if you ask him what changed that night at the reunion, he will tell you it was never really about the money, or the foundation, or even Marcus's success. It was about being reminded, in front of a room full of people who had forgotten to look closely enough, that the value of a person was never up for someone else to decide in the first place. Some people spend their whole lives chasing rooms like that ballroom, chasing the approval of people who will only ever offer it conditionally. And some people simply sit down, split their sandwich in half, and offer it to whoever needs it most, never imagining that 22 years later, a billionaire would walk across a crowded room just to remind everyone exactly who the most successful person there truly was.